So for today's lesson, you are going to be learning how to make a no-bake cheesecake. So we're going to be doing this in lesson, and this usually forms part of your assessment. Now, it's really important that you make as many notes as possible so that you fully know what you are doing for this particular practical, as you're being expected to be extremely independent when doing this. So ingredients you are going to need. You're going to need 280 millilitres of double cream or a cream substitute. You're going to need 75 grams of margarine, 250 grams of cream cheese, 50 grams of icing sugar, 150 grams of crushed digestive biscuits. Please can you crush them at home, and fruit toppings of your choice. You might also have other ideas of things you might want to add, like different essences or anything like that, but this will be explained throughout the video, so you might decide to add these to your ingredients list later on. You will also need to bring in a tin for you to bake, to present your cheesecake in. So just a normal baking tin is fine. Usually a round one is what we usually use, but if you have a different shaped one, you can use that as well.
So the first bit for making your cheesecake needs to be completed at home. So what I've got here is digestive biscuits. Now the amount you need works out at approximately 10 biscuits if you're using digestives. Now you can choose a different base if you wanted to. You need to crush these bits at home. So easiest way to do that is put it in a plastic bag like this and use a rolling pin to roll over the top. You can just crush it in a bowl, that will work as well, but really you just need it to start looking like it's sort of sand rather than any big lumps or chunks of biscuits. So you probably need to do this quite a few times to get it to that point. Now there are two ways of doing this next bit. So you will need to be melting your butter. Now with regards to the butter, you can either put it in a jug like this, a measuring jug, and put it into the microwave for about 30 seconds. You need to be very, very careful though, because you need to make sure it doesn't burn. If you put it in for 30 seconds and there's still lumps of butter, you can put it in for a little bit more time, but just keep an eye on it, so sort of 10 seconds at a time, because you don't want this butter to burn. And the other way to do this is by getting a saucepan, and you can melt this butter on the hob. Okay, so it's up to you which one you use, but try and make use of all the facilities. So if there's a queue for the microwave, for example, it would be a good idea to go and use the hob, just so we're not waiting around to get this completed. Now once you have melted your butter, it should be liquid like this, so either it's in a jug like this or it'll be in a saucepan. Either one is absolutely fine. Just make sure in both of them it's not sizzling or really hot, because that will start burning your butter. So if you've melted your butter in the saucepan, you can just add your crushed up digestives to that saucepan and mix them together using a wooden spoon. If you've used a measuring jug, you're probably going to want a different bowl, and you're going to pour in your digestives roughly like that, and then put your butter over the top. Now you're going to use a wooden spoon to mix this all up until it just sort of resembles sand that's more sort of a wet sand, so it should sort of start clumping together a little bit. So just try and make sure it's as much of the dry parts of the biscuit have got a bit of the butter on, and that will just help solidify your base later on. Okay, so now what I've got is my tin. Now you need to bring one of these in. One I've got here is about 20 centimeters diameter, that's across the circle. And what you're going to do is you're just going to take your base like this, and you are going to spoon it in or tip it in, and then at the back of the spoon, just here, use your thumb on the top and just press it down like that. So you want it quite tightly packed together. Now, depending on the size of the tin will depend on how much of this you need. So if you've got sort of a much larger tin, you might need to bring in a few more biscuits, just to make sure your base is fully completed. And the idea is you want a nice even layer. Press it all down as you go. Twist it round if you need to. Now if you were making this at home, you'd probably want to put this in the fridge next, just to help it cool down. At school this isn't always possible, but just be aware that we want it to be quite solid so that when we add our cheese mixture on top, it doesn't start melting or anything like that. Now you need sort of your mixture about halfway up this tin, not right to the top, because or else you're not going to have room for any of your cheesecake filling that's going to go on the top. So just be aware of that. If you've got spare, not a problem, that's fine. Right, that can go like that. Now from here you're going to start adding your cream to a large bowl. Don't use the same one as you've just used for your biscuits unless you've already washed it out. So if we're sort of lacking bowls, you can wash it back out and use it again. So cream's going to go into here like that. Make sure the whole thing is in there. You can't really take this home if there's bits spare. And then what you're going to do is you're going to use a hand whisk to whisk this up. Now a hand whisk looks a little bit like this, usually with a few more bits on there, and you sort of use this motion with your wrist to mix it up. The other alternative is using a electric whisk. Now it's up to your teacher which one you'll be using. Most of you are likely to start off with the hand whisk, and then if you need a bit of extra help we might use the electric whisk as we go along. So if you're using the electric whisk, so the one I've got here looks like this. Now this is the bottom part of it, and you can see there's two different descriptions on there, and this one looks slightly different to this one, so you need to look to find which one goes where. So these bits here, you then put them into there like that, and the same with that one, into there, and it should sort of click in, and then it shouldn't come out very easily. So the next thing you need to do is you need to plug this in. Now you need to keep your hands well away from these parts as they will spin round, and if your hands are in the way, that is going to hurt you. So make sure that your hands are well away and that you're in control of the electric whisk before using it. If you're unsure, you need to check with your teacher so that you remain safe in the food room. So we're whisking this up until it forms soft peaks. So you should be able to see that it's bubbling up now. It's not quite where we need it to be quite yet. I'm tilting the bowl to the side just to help it get the whole part of the cream, because the base of my bowl is quite wide. So throughout this process, I'm moving the whisk around. I'm trying to avoid contact with the bowl. And you should be able to see from the bubbles that the whisking is putting air into the mixture. So that's the function of whisking. So you should be able to see that it's starting to get thicker. So I'm nearly at the point of stopping now. So what you're doing here now is, so you should be able to notice that this has now formed soft peaks, and you can tell that by putting in the whisk, and it should sort of pull upwards. If it's still sort of quite runny in the bowl, you might need to whisk it a bit longer, but you do need to be very careful not to over whisk your cream, because then it starts becoming unusable and it's quite difficult to then use that on your cheesecake. So from here we are adding in our cream cheese, so I just use some of this soft cheese here. When you open this up, don't worry if there is a little bit of water on the top, you can just drain that into the sink if needed. So I would put all of this in. So just use one of the spoons and you're just slowly going to stir that in. You're not beating it, you're not whisking it, you're just slowly making sure it's all combined together. Just like that. So just use a spoon to do that. Either this spoon or a wooden spoon is fine. And when that's done, you're then going to add your icing sugar. So the idea is you want to just make sure that this is all blended together. As best as it can. So just like that, so it's all combined together. Then add in your icing sugar and combine that too, just mix that on in. You don't need to beat it, it's not a vigorous movement, just slowly blend it on in until you can't see any of the lumps of icing sugar anymore. Make sure that there's none stuck at the bottom. So you could, if you wanted to, add in any other sort of flavouring that you might want in the mixture at this point. So say for example you wanted some vanilla essence. I've had people before make lemon cheesecakes and they've squeezed lemon juice into this mixture. Just be aware that if you're doing anything that's got quite a lot of liquid content, that the liquid's going to go in here as well. So you might need to think about that and how much of it that you can put in without making the mixture too runny. So that's if you wanted to. As an adaptation, you could add flavouring, you could add different heights of fruit. If you wanted a bit of a crispy layer in there, you could add bits of biscuit or something like that, depending on the cheesecake that you have decided to make. So from here you need to get your base, and I'll put that directly in front of you now, and you are just going to spoon the mixture from your bowl into here. Now you're probably not going to use all of it, so I'll just put a few spoonfuls at first. Don't sort of overload it or anything like that. You don't need to mix it around or else it's going to start taking off bits of the base. So just gently tip it on. You can add more later, so just add a few bits at first. So you're gently going to spread it out. You can use the back of your spoon to start off with, but you need to mainly use this, and this is called a palette knife. Okay, and the palette knife is just used to sort of spread this over so that it ends up being a nice smooth top of your cheesecake. So you can see there I'm nearly at the top of my tin, so I'm going to need to add a bit more of that cheesecake filling on to fill it up and make it an even layer. Remember, you want it even, so make sure that on both sides it's very well considered and it's not hasn't got more filling on one side than the other, for example. Remember, part of this, I want to see your adaptations. So it's not just the case of making a basic cheesecake. I want to see what you've done to make an adaptation to this recipe. So think about any additional ingredients, think about things that maybe you could add to make yours unique and stand out from other people's. someone that was very, very quick at completing the first stages of making the cheesecake, you could, if you wanted to, add some piping to your cheesecake. Now this is number one, if you're being very quick, there will be a time limit to actually do this in the lesson, so you need to be aware of that if you're planning on doing piping. You can bring in your own tools if you'd like to, but we do have some at school that you can borrow, but obviously we've only got a few of those, so just be aware of that. If you bring in your own, please make sure you look after them and take care of them so we don't get the school ones muddled up with your ones. So if you have time for this, you can add a bit of piping. Now let me just talk you very, very quickly through piping, and you will need to do a little bit more research of this at home. So I've currently already put my nozzle on. Now my one's a little bit different to the ones we got at school. So the one at schools, we cut off the bottom part of the bag because it's a disposable bag, and we insert the nozzle down into the bag, just for making sure that it's all as it needs to be. Now when you've got your bag like this, roll it down, fold it down as far as it will go. Now then you can start adding in your cheesecake mixture. So you can do this just using your wooden spoon and putting it inside that bag. A spatula is another good way of getting the cream into here. So I'm just using as much of my mixture and putting it in here as possible. Now I might not use it all, but then what you can do is then pull this upwards, and then it should all sort of be mostly at the bottom part and not all round this top edge. Okay, so moving on from that, you then need to get your cheesecake, and then you need to decide exactly where your piping is going to go. Now at the moment you can probably see that my cheesecake mixture is up here, so you will need to push that down right to the bottom where the nozzle is in order to be successful with this. Now you might want to test it a little bit just into your bowl until you've got the hang of it. But remember, if you're doing this, you need to be very, very quick and efficient and independent with it. So first of all, I'm going to start with my middle section. Like that. Hopefully you can see that. And then I might add some decoration around the edge. Something like that, and you could add extra if you wanted to, so different designs you could potentially do. You could probably research this and do a little bit of research for how you'd want yours to look at home, and I'd recommend that you'd sort of make a design for how you would like your cheesecake to look. Remember, the top of this is also going to add fruit, so you need to leave yourself time if you're doing this to add that, and if you need to cut any fruit, cut the fruit, etc. So now I'm thinking about my decoration. and how I would like this to look. So currently using my bridge grip to cut through my strawberries. Make sure it's steady before cutting. And then when you've cut your fruit, you can then start putting it on here. Now, you might be bringing in fruit that doesn't actually need cutting, which is fine. But you might be doing something that would look better with it cut. So just be aware when you're doing it of how you want it to look. So with this, I might add a little bit more of my cream to just sort of make these stand up nicely. Like that. And I can use a range of different fruit. I've had people do things with sort of lemons before, and they've grated lemon zest over the top, and that's worked really, really well. So just think of what is going to be the best way in which you can show your understanding of this task. So you need to work out what decoration you want to do on yours, and what will show your skills best. Now remember, because we're using fresh fruit, don't buy your ingredients too far in advance, or else they're going to end up going out of date and they're not going to be very nice on your cheesecake. Okay, so I'm looking forward to seeing all of your fantastic creations that I'm sure you're going to come up with. One other thing you could add is something like coulis, and you could end up doing swirls and things like that, and then adding the bits of fruit on top. Bonus points for if you could make your own coulis at home rather than buying it from the shop. If you're doing something like that, make sure to take pictures and bring those in to hand in for part of your assessment.
So remember to think very, very carefully about what specifically you are going to do on your cheesecake. Now think particularly about the presentation. Think about any adaptations you can make to make yours unique to you. I don't want them all looking the same as what I've done. I'd like you to consider a variety of different fruit that you could include, particularly in season fruits. You can consider a variety of different sort of toppings or flavourings that you could include specifically to you. So looking at the ones on your screen, we've got ones that have got sauces carefully considered and put on top. We've got some that have got a filling in the cheesecake, so you can see one in the middle of your screen that's actually got raspberries within the cheesecake, and you could do that if you wanted. You would just add those raspberries right before you put the cheesecake filling onto the base. We've got ones that have carefully considered and had fruit cut, and some that haven't. We've got some that have sort of used coulis, and we've sort of really thought about how we could swirl that around. If you're doing something like that, though, I'd also like to see fruit on the top of the cheese.